the screen. So with that, I would like to thank you, Paul, for being here today with us, and please receive a very enthusiastic welcome.
Thank you very much, Arnaud, and thank you very much for the invitation to take part in today's event. You're all very welcome to today's presentation. So I'm going to get stuck straight into the topic, and the topic I'm going to talk about today is C19 Cipher Storm. So a small bit about myself. I'm involved in two main organizations. The one is the ICTTF, the International Cyber Threat Task Force, and many of you may have met me previously at our events like the EU Cyber Summit. And of course, I work with an organization called Cyber Risk International. So that's enough about that. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. So the elephant in the room is COVID-19. And what I want to discuss over the next 30 or 40 minutes or so is the impact that that has had in relation to cybersecurity, cyber risk, and so on, and the global impact. And also what that might mean in the short to medium term future in relation to potentially how things may get worse as a consequence of the impact of C19. So we'll talk about it from the perspective of where we are today, the impact it's had on businesses as we struggle to get back to, if effectively, a new normal. I promised I wouldn't keep using that phrase, but it is the reality as we get back to a new normal. And then we will look at some steps we can take, 10 key steps we can take to actually help deal with the risks that are posed by the impact of C19. So is COVID-19 a pandemic? Is it a black swan event? Is it something that could have been foreseen? Or is this effectively the new normal from the perspective of we're going to have to deal with more global incidents like this, whether they're biological incidents, whether they are even cyber infections, if you like, of systems. But is there going to be events that bring us all together globally and impact us? And we probably, could debate this about things that we dodged a bullet on, like WannaCry and issues like that they were potentially the cyber version of that could have had a global impact around and affected every business, large and small, in this interconnected, interdependent ecosystem that we all work and operate in. So let's look at some of the harsh top level impacts of COVID-19 so far on the world. Well, it's caused chaos in the global economy, that's for sure. And it's impacted businesses large and small. This isn't something that organizations could have been prepared for many aspects of it, because it's one of those things that either everybody is starting to get prepared for something like this, or they're not. So I think we see more and more that people now accept these things may happen more regularly, things that affect us globally and right across the whole digital architecture of the internet and so on, the digital economy. So there's more of that to come, I'm sure. There's been disruption in the supply chains, and not just things like food, but technology, goods, all sorts of things, medical supplies. Nothing has been avoided, the impact of this, because of the prioritization, obviously, that has gone on, because of the impacts on just physically people being able to move about, and the logistics involved, and from warehousing, from transport, from flights, all the different aspects that make up the global supply chain have been impacted by COVID-19. It has transformed society. The way we're able to interact as human beings with each other has been greatly affected. Social distancing, wearing masks, getting groups together. Even today, we're doing this virtually, on a webinar format, because this is the way we have to operate. This is the way we have to adapt in order to be able to move forward and be able to still carry out our key functions. So it has had an impact on transforming society in the way that we operate. It's accelerated business model transformation. Now, some would see that almost as a positive, because things that may have taken a long time to occur, or may have had a longer term plans, simply were accelerated because of the impact of COVID. This is something when, well, no, we just need it now, just do it. And there's a knock-on effect to that. I'll talk a little bit more about the risks that have come from that. Essentially leveraging what we'd call shadow IT, or not following policies, not following procedures, because simply it's almost like being at war, and you simply just have to get the job done, and there may not be the luxury of time to follow the normal assurances and protocols that would follow to carry out certain tasks, especially around augmenting network architecture, people working from home, that kind of thing. And there's been a massive impact on the inherent cyber risk of businesses. So let's just drill down on that briefly. So what's the inherent cyber risk? The inherent cyber risk is the risk minus any mitigating control. So it's based on the profile of your business. So how many employees do you have? What countries do you operate in? How much dependence do you have on websites for doing your business on social media? All of those sort of cyber related elements make up the profile of your inherent cyber risk of your business model of your organization, and all of those elements will have greatly changed. So in other words, what you were before COVID or pre-COVID, you don't look like that now. I don't know of any business that is exactly the same as they were beforehand. Operationally, the model will have changed, and that will have an impact on how things are impacting in relation to the inherent cyber risk and those metrics around that. So where's your risk coming from minus any controls? And we'll delve a little bit deeper on that as we go through the next few slides. There's also an increased reliance on the digital economy. And I don't mean that just from a business perspective, but all of us. The amount of things that are being done online now, and the amount of reliance on whereas beforehand it may have been nice to be able to get something online or handy and useful for somebody and convenient for them to do that. Sometimes now it's the only way to get something is that you're dependent on the internet, and you're dependent on that digital economy, on finding a supplier, that has a good logistics backbone and a service that they can actually deliver things in a timely way, and all of those elements. So something that may not have been a priority even in your own everyday life yourself beforehand may now be something that is almost a key point of failure. And I'm sort of zoning in here on things like how important was your home internet connection and your little router, your Wi-Fi router there beforehand. Now it might be your lifeline to get everything, depending on your setup. And the same with small businesses, medium businesses, and larger businesses. The dependence on that architecture, whether it's something small and simple, right up to the more complex environments, there has been this increased reliance on the digital economy. Other things we've seen is the increased reliance on the internet itself, the backbone of the internet. I can speak from real life case study here. My own internet went down at home and it was like the end of the world. And luckily our own office is not too far away, and I was able to, during lockdown, be able to visit the office on my own. But without the internet, that lifeline, that dependence on that key piece that links to everything else, would have a massive impact on everybody, not just from a business perspective, but if people are learning online, if they're communicating online, if they're socializing online, that reliance on that almost luxury entertainment facility of the internet is now actually a key vital part of, it's almost the oxygen of everyday life. There's been increased cyber threat actor activity. Now this was interesting because I think it was around March the 10th when I did my last physical face-to-face presentation at the Irish Computer Society, and I talked then, it was just we're sort of facing into lockdown around that time, and we were talking about the fact that I said, look, all the bad guys are going to jump on this COVID-19 thing. They're all going to start doing their scams, and of course they did. Now there was a small lull in the activity where they sort of almost came to a détente and a truce and said, well, look, we're going to still be criminals, we're going to still do all our nefarious activity, but we're not going to go after hospitals, we're not going to go after the health sector and so on. That probably only lasted about 48 hours or 72 hours, if it even lasted, because we saw lots of activity and still do, both Interpol, Europol, local law enforcement, even here in Ireland on Garda Síochána, have reported massive increase. We're talking 500-600% increase in internet fraud related activity. And this is everything from SMS scams, smishing, phishing emails, fake charities, invoice fraud, everything. They've seen this as one of the biggest opportunities now that they can use this hook to socially engineer the way onto another part of a scam. So this has become a catalyst for malefactors and for the cyber bad guys to engage in their kind of activity. And the fact is that we're all more vulnerable because there's been the disruption and then this increase in activity. And these are parts of what I'm going to talk about here that are building into this storm, or the C19 storm. We've seen the acceleration. What has usually took years has now become months. I've talked to a number of organizations that simply were able to roll out projects within a few weeks that they had planned to do within months. And again, necessity is the mother of invention. And when people need to get things done, there'll be no paralysis by analysis. They will just roll things out. And there's a new set of rules and a new rule book when it comes to that. And the new rules are that there are no rules. Effectively, when somebody needs to get something working, they are skipping the normal assurances, the normal controls, the normal practices of governance, of oversight, of risk management, proactive risk management, of even compliance in relation to rolling these things out, because they simply want to survive. They want to stay operational, and they want to get back into a stronger footing. And I think where we are from an economic point of view, and businesses are, we're in this area now of the dust is settling, and certain sins have been committed, which now need to be acknowledged and need to be forgiven for why certain things were done in a certain way. But those risks cannot be ignored. They cannot be put under the carpet. People are now going to have to identify those risks that are present and be able to mitigate them up to an acceptable risk profile. And I think that's really, really important. There's been an increased pressure, as we said, on the supply chain and the digital architecture. So you think of this even from any business's perspective. All of a sudden, they may have had one or two people that use video conferencing. Now everybody uses it. So they need to find a supplier. Then they pick a supplier, and then they read the media and say, oh, don't use Zoom. It's not secure, all that kind of stuff. And so all of this causes confusion. It causes risks in itself. Are these technologies being deployed properly? Are they being configured properly? Are your suppliers somebody who may be a key supplier within the next few months? So obviously video conferencing may not have been a key supplier, what we'd refer to as a tier one supplier for many businesses, but it may be now their lifeline to dealing with their customers, to dealing with their staff, to dealing with their shareholders, everything else like that. And it may be the most important supplier. So have they done due diligence around the technology, around the supplier, all of those kind of things. And of course, I've already referenced there about the pressures on the digital architecture. And we've seen that, whereas there might have been 2 or 3 users going through a VPN, now all of a sudden networks are being, network administrators are being pressurized into giving everybody access remotely. Is that being done in a secure way? Is there VPNs being used? Is there two-factor authentication? All of those kind of protocols are they being followed? So these are all elements. These are all part of what's building up into where we are today. And of course, there's a psychological impact on humans. Humans have been through all of this process, which of course has had a certain level of erosion on people's capability on how they can work. But there's also the distraction factor. If somebody's used to working in an office and they have that persona of their business persona working in an office, let's be honest, if they're at home and they're distracted with children, with beautiful sunny weather, all of those kinds of things, it may be easier for bad guys to socially engineer. They may be more vulnerable and susceptible to falling for something. And also, of course, there's the whole factor of that when you look at that and people working from home, that they're working on residential networks. They're working probably a lot of the times on personal devices. And they're also working in environments that are not conducive to secure working. And by that, I mean, even the very fact that, I've been on Zoom calls with sensitive level material, you're conveying people, and beside them is maybe Alexa, and so that's effectively a microphone, another microphone in the room, and that could be potentially be picking up on what's being talked about. So the very environments that people are operating from or struggling to operate from, and this isn't criticism. We've all done this just to survive and just to continue to be able to go on. And there is no criticism here. What there is now a point to catch our breath, point out what's being done, and look at mitigating it so you can go forward into that new normal that we talk about. So what I'm talking about here, and probably one of the coolest slides you'll ever see in the world, is the C19 Cipher Storm. So what I'm talking about is all of these elements coming together. It's not one thing, and this isn't even death by 1,000 cuts, but it's about that knock-on effect, that interconnectedness, that interdependence between large businesses, small businesses, and nothing being the same within a relatively short period of time. We're talking about, maybe 12 weeks or so, and everything has changed. People's business models, how people operate, and certainly they don't really want to go back to that previous state, because it probably no longer exists anyway. So let's look at what makes up this storm. So we have the elements around the digital infrastructure itself. We have the cyber threat actor behavior and all of that activity. We have the economy basically being hammered left, right, and center, and nobody really understanding and being able to predict things in a normal way around the economy. We also have two other elements there that I want to bring your attention to, which is the geopolitics of this and the privacy elements of it. So we're making decisions in the short term, which we may regret in the long term, essentially around things like privacy. Tracing apps, very important. There needs to be debate around these kinds of things, what they'll be used for, and you know, be able to control that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, if anybody understands that Irish phrase. But it's essentially, let's be very important about what we're giving away to deal with this problem, and will we be able to put the genie back in the bottle? Because when it comes to privacy, that's a key one, certainly from the moral ethics perspective of controlling privacy and people's human right to privacy. I think that we need to still be cognizant that it's a very important element, and making decisions around that we may regret certainly in the medium to long term. And the geopolitics of this, I mean, even the likes of Sky News is running lots of these sort of mini video vignette stories about the nation state cyber threat actors who are hacking into systems to try and find out how far somebody is along with the COVID-19 vaccine. But the reality is that kind of behavior is going on all the time anyway. Nation state actors, you know, industrial espionage, all of that kind of stuff is going on anyway. But when you factor this into what's happening politically around the world, it's a very volatile situation, and you have to factor in the politics of this around the world, from the likes of certainly the major actors involved, the UK, China, the United States, and so on, and how that may impact other elements in relation to this. Especially if you are involved in any kind of a global enterprise, where you may be dealing with multiple levels of jurisdiction, multiple levels of different cyber culture. By that I mean it's just the attitude towards security and the attitude towards privacy in those elements, because understanding that inherent risk level, and how that impacts your inherent risk level is very important. So that's C19 in the middle of all of that. So let's go under the surface a small bit, and let's just delve down a little bit and see what's behind some of these things. So we talked about the working from home, the increased attack surface. And look, that goes without saying. I've mentioned their residential networks. You know, I've been on high level board phone calls there when people are logging in on their kids' laptops, and you can see the kid's name up on the laptop. So again, it's not criticism, it's the fact that people are doing their best, but the attack surface without a doubt has increased. It's just easier for bad guys to do bad stuff to good people, essentially, at the end of the day. And what this means is, the bottom line, is that your critical assets are more exposed. Your data, your connections, your relationships with suppliers. You may be part of an attack vector where somebody wants to hack through you to get to your customer, that kind of thing. I might want to pivot and attack through you. So those kind of things, your critical assets, whether those assets are data, whether they're people, or whether they're resources, those assets are more exposed than they were, without a doubt. And you have that distracted workforce part. People wondering, are they going to go back to the full-time jobs? Are they going to get childcare? All the real human life stuff that is going to distract them. And on top of that, just being out of the routine, being out of sorts, and not having that business persona part in. And so let me just branch off on that for a moment, what I mean by that. What I mean is that generally people put on their game face when they go to work, let's be honest, and they get suited and booted, they do their piece, and they go in, and they're in a certain mode of, I'm working, I'm being professional, that's what I'm doing. The minute they come home from work, they're in a different persona, and bad guys know that from the perspective of being able to use romance scams, different social engineering attacks, all those kind of things that they use on social networks then to try and leverage them. But they still see them as that person that works in a bank, as opposed to that person who's on a social media site. But now there's this hybrid environment that they're not in work, but they're not in work. They're at home, but they're not at home because they're in work. And it's that kind of hybrid environment without the proper training, without the proper support mechanisms around staff, they're going to become much more vulnerable to cyber threat actors. And the critical national infrastructure itself around the world is under increased attacks. And we've seen that, as I've already mentioned there, in relation to the vaccine, C19 vaccine, those kind of things. There's a lot more state actor activity. And we can see that in all of the different reports and all of the different intel briefings. So you've got bad guys who are doing it with a motivation of making money, and you've got the nation state actors who are doing it for other reasons. And those reasons may be that whoever gets the vaccine gets the power, those kind of things. So there's a lot of different forces at play here. So it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change, Charles Darwin. I think that's a really important point here, because that's really what it means into, we've all adapted, we've done very well, we should pat ourselves on the back that we're all, able to keep businesses going, everything else like that. But now it's about transitioning. It's about transitioning into that new normal. And nobody knows what that new normal is. So what I'm going to share with you now is my view of some of the key things, or 10 of the key things I think that we can do to look at safeguarding that transition into that sort of new normal from an operational point of view, as individuals, as citizens of the internet, as businesses, as organizations and entities that are working with those. So the first thing we need to do is we need to acknowledge that we are completely interconnected and interdependent. And I know there's been countless information online about the sort of parallels between a biological virus and infection and that of a cyber attack and so on. But I think it's even much simpler than that. I mean, the internet is flat. There's no jurisdiction. There's no color, creed, religion, any of that stuff. It is just one big vast space. And I think COVID-19 has brought that realization to people that we are all just on this one planet, and we are all interconnected and interdependent. And as you drill down on that, you realize that it doesn't matter whether you're a small entity in the financial sector or a large entity, or if you're in the aviation sector, or you're in logistics, or you're in retail, or whatever. All of our businesses, all of our society, everything is interconnected, and the flow of information and the protection of the flow of information is important to all of us. And it being the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of that information being degraded in any particular way, or being attacked in any way, impacts on all of us. So we have to get our selfish mindsets away from the siloed approach of, well, I'm okay, Jack, what about you? Or this is okay, what about that? Because what we have to do is we all have to raise our game together in order to be able to make this a much more secure environment going forward from what has happened in the last few months, from the perspective of cyber risk particularly. So we need to take a holistic approach of what's required. This is impacting all of us. It's not an American issue. It's not a Chinese issue. It's not the UK. Ireland is far from out of it, to speak to anybody who's listening in Ireland. So it's really about all of us acknowledging that whatever we do for the good, or for the dealing with the cyber risk issue here, is actually good for everybody who is using the digital architecture, which is effectively the internet and the digital economy. So it will impact all of us that rely on that. So what are we aiming for? We're aiming towards a culture of shared ownership, risk ownership. So I mean that from internally in an organization now. It can't be that, hey, listen, there's one person, the head of IT security or the head of network security or something, is responsible for this, because this involves people, processes, technology, and that hybrid piece of technology and people coming together, which is essentially bots and algorithms. It affects all of those things. We need to make sure that all of those are protected, that we have now the right kinds of policies and so on around those things, the right kind of protections around them. So we need to make sure that this is a real challenge for leadership within organizations, that they understand that they have to control this from the top down, and there has to be a culture of shared risk ownership and proactive risk management. So aim towards business enablement beyond compliance. So look, I've often talked before about compliance almost being the enemy of security, because you can be compliant but not secure. But without being too facetious about that, what I really mean is, in relation to this point, is compliance is the minimum baseline that people really want to be. Think of what compliance is. It's somebody coming in and say, you really don't have your act together. if you're not compliant. But to enable a business going forward into the environment we are now operating in, this new normal, and how we're actually developing into that, you need to get smarter. You need to raise your game, and you need to be looking, well, actually, this is the way the world's going to be. There's going to be more digitalization. There's going to be more people working from home, all that kind of stuff. So how do we do this where we can enable the business? How can we do this so we're literally not just aiming towards the minimum level of what we can do here, but how can we do this in clever ways, innovative ways that will actually enable the business? Aim to be multidisciplinary. This isn't just about technology. This isn't just about software development. This is about architecture. This is about legal. This is about procurement. This is about business models. This is about everything within the business, all the different disciplines that are involved in that business. Everybody needs to come together and collaborate around developing that strategy to move forward, to enable the business, and to protect the business from a cyber risk perspective. And aim to balance their short-term goals with longer-term imperatives. So there will be certain things that have been done under fire in order to just stay alive. But now we need to acknowledge those things, we need to mitigate them, and we need to make sure that they're not going to bite you in the long term. So in other words, that you're going to make sure that if the imperative of the business is to keep its reputation, to stay profitable, whatever it happens to be, those kinds of imperatives are still going to be there. So you're not going to continue to take those short-term decisions, those risk-based decisions under fire that may actually affect your long-term objective of maintaining a good reputation or not being breached or whatever it happens to be, that perspective. So inertia is the cyber contagion. So what do I mean by that? Well, doing nothing is just going to make this worse. And that's the real action point here, is that we all now will understand that everything is transformed from a digital risk landscape perspective. We're heading into a new normal. We can't sit on our laurels and think, well, it's okay, I'll just do the same old operationally and everything will be fine, I'm doing my job, because that's inertia. And inertia will cause this problem, this cyber storm that I speak of, to actually be a bigger issue, and will cause the risk to spread globally between that interconnected and interdependent network that we call the internet, that we call the global economy. So to start, we need to look at our cyber DNA. We need to look at how our cyber DNA has changed as an organization, as an entity, because of COVID. How has our operational model changed? How has our dependency on suppliers, on key technologies, on our digital architecture, on our infrastructure, on our people? How has all of that changed as a consequence? So let me take you on a little trip here in a quick sidebar around what is involved in putting together a cyber strategy and the requirements. Well, very quickly, every business has a unique business model, and that business model will require certain kinds of technology in place in order to deliver that business model. So in other words, they may use the cloud, they may use handheld devices, they may use multiple servers around the world, whatever it happens to be, depending on what that business is, they have certain requirements. But whatever those requirements are, they will also have related to them business, legal, and regulatory drivers. In other words, if the business ICT requirements are that they need a database of all of their clients with their phone numbers, their email addresses, and so on, well, guess what? There's going to be regulatory requirement drivers that say you have to be compliant with EU GDPR. So there's always going to be things related back to how you're doing things, down to encryption, down to compliance with standards, frameworks, laws, all of that kind of area. So whatever your model is, you'll have ICT requirements, information communication technology requirements. And all of those will bring with them a certain amount of business, a certain amount of legal, and a certain amount of regulatory drivers. And then on one hand, you have all these cyber threat groups. You have cyber criminals, nation states, hacktivists, thrill seekers, terrorists, all with their own personal motivations, their own unique motivations of why they may want to cause you harm. So what your cyber strategy needs to take account of is what's on the right-hand side, the employees, the suppliers, and business partners. It needs to be collaborative. Is that piece I'm talking about being collaborative, about being multidisciplinary? Get everybody together on this because they need to be part of the cyber strategy so that the board can be responsible to monitor, evaluate, and direct the cybersecurity strategy of the organization. So what I'm putting to you is that your cyber strategy pre-COVID may not, in fact, I'll take a good bet that it is not, appropriate for what your operational model is now, because your business ICT requirements have changed, and so have many other aspects of that. So just a quick sidebar again on the requirement drivers. What we've got here is to understand how vast this is. I mean, we're talking about over 175 different legal jurisdictions, over 400 different standards, frameworks, everything that are related to cybersecurity. So we're talking everything from business ones, ISO 27001. In Ireland, you might have the legal criminal justice. Actually, you might have regulatory stuff from the EU GDPR. So there's many, many different pieces around that. And this is it in a nutshell. This is the real simple version of it here. You've got the wheels on the car, you want your business to move forward. On one side, you have a business strategy, and that business strategy might be, hey, we're an online bank, or we're an online training company, or we are a retail, whatever it happens to be. You have a business strategy, and that's what your business is going to do. And it needs to make sure that the cyber strategy is completely aligned with whatever that business strategy is. It can't be something downloaded off the internet. It can't be a template. It has to be uniquely reflect what those business ICT requirements are, what the legal, the regulatory, and everything else requirements are of that piece, and aligned with the business strategy piece. You've got your governance, which is effectively the steering wheel and oversight, and it's all joined together with a cyber risk framework. So that's effectively what businesses need to understand going forward is they need these pieces in order to now drive their business forward and make sure that everything is aligned on that piece. So now I'm going to walk you through very quickly some key steps or 10 of the most salient points that I felt were most relevant to bring to your attention today that I think will be helpful in dealing with the cyberstorm. So the first one, and these are in no particular order, the first one is to create a culture of cyber resilience. So the organization needs to acknowledge the importance of proactive cyber risk management. So get out of this mindset of, well, we'll deal with that when it happens. When the fire happens, we'll get the fire extinguishers and we'll put it out. Proactive cyber resilience and cyber risk management is about reducing the likelihood of it happening and reducing the impact and increasing your ability to deal with it. So all of those things can be done by what we call business planning. Right. So it's something businesses do every day. It is the foreseen. And, you know, whether we think this is a black swan event or whatever we want to refer to as, we now understand and feel what the new normal is, and we need to be prepared. So we should be investing our time, energy, money, resources into cyber resilience governance. That means appointing somebody, making sure there's somebody responsible in that organization that is driving that, a champion of resilience. And that isn't something that's been paid lip service to, oh, we update the business continuity plan once a year, or we do disaster recovery testing every 2 years, whatever it must be. This is now one of the priorities of every business, or should be the priority of every business now going forward since COVID-19. Go beyond compliance. I've mentioned this already. You need to go way beyond compliance. Don't set your sights on the minimum level here. Do what's appropriate for your business and strengthen the behavior of all of your people in relation to this. Create that culture within your organization from the top down that this is something that's so important. They need to understand what they need to protect, why they're trying to protect it, and everybody pull together in the same direction so they can start protecting the organization from the kind of threats that are out there to the operational model, the new operational model, and so on. And build that culture where people are confident to contribute and to help, and to help the business transition to their new normal state. Make risk-informed decisions. And here I'm going to talk a little bit later about meaningful metrics, but this is about, you're going to be making decisions under fire here about all these kind of topics and issues around that, but make sure they're risk-informed decisions. So if you're using metrics, please do not use metrics such as, vulnerability indexes and all this kind of stuff, right? Because that is no use to the business making, or little to no use to the business making informed business decisions. So if you're using any sort of cyber risk quantification techniques, or you want to relate any metrics back to the business, relate it back to the business objectives. If the business objective is, hey, we're going to roll out an app for our clients, and by the way, here's the risks we're carrying around that app being rolled out, the business will understand that and relate to that, as opposed to going into the business and saying, hey, we've just done a scan on the network and we have 50,000 level 5 vulnerabilities. Yeah, it's just not going to get the buy-in, especially with so much going on, and trying to get the focus of business leaders. You need to be able to relate things back to the business. So meaningful metrics is key, and take a zero trust approach, zero trust in dealing with your suppliers. whatever relationship you have with them on a personal level, on even on a how long you're dealing with those organizations, the world has changed. So the rules have changed. And now you need to effectively almost start those relationships fresh from the perspective of saying, hey, I need to understand where you are from a risk posture. I need to understand what your inherent risk is, what your maturity levels are, what your residual risk is. Just some, key metrics that you can use back to the business, so you can understand what your risk tolerance and appetite is in dealing with the business overall, and you can look at that aggregated risk factor as well from that perspective. Focus on your critical assets. You can't take care of everything from the perspective of there's going to be limited resources, limited budgets, limited time to get these things done. So you're going to need to prioritize in making these decisions. But here's some basic things that you need to make sure are in place. First of all, enforce cyber hygiene. Most cyber breaches, most cyber threats and risks that are out there can be prevented by being mitigated with existing controls that are identified. So make sure you've got the basics, anti-malware, patching's being done, those kind of things. All the basic cyber hygiene controls are in place, because they're inexcusable at this point, especially when you're moving forward into this environment. And that's sort of that catch your breath stuff I'm talking about. Now draw a line and say, right, we need to make sure at a very, very base level, we have cyber hygiene in place. Make sure you're monitoring all the activity on your network. Especially with so many remote users, especially with so much external traffic, and try and profile what the new normal of that traffic is, so you can pick up on network anomaly traffic, and detect that to see if something is nefarious and something might be an issue. Invest in, and I mean, from the sake of resources, time, money, everything else like that, one of your key best friends here going forward is going to be identity and access management. Because now all your digital data and all your data is going to be accessed from so many different sources and so many different people. So this is one of your strongest safeguards, is to make sure that you have a mature identity and access management set of controls and program in place. And automate. There's limited resources in the world of cyber anyway. So never mind trying to get consultants in or get people in to help organizations. I know a lot of it can be done remotely, but a lot of it can be automated. So whatever can be automated, but whatever you do not automate a broken process. Make sure that the process fits. Make sure it's giving you out whatever key metrics you need to ensure that that process is running properly and feeding you back whatever intel you need from that process and whatever key metrics, and then automate those processes as much as possible. Update as you transition to the new normal. So by this, I mean, you can't just kick the can down the road and say, oh, we're in transition now for the next 6 months to a year, and then we'll catch your breath and we'll update everything. There will be spikes. There's going to be different things happening over this course of time. So what you need to do is continually update your policies, your procedures, your checklists, and gather evidence and controls are in place. Continually test and challenge any assumptions you're making about recovery times and so on. And make sure you have a crisis management plan. If COVID-19 has taught businesses anything else, it's you need a crisis management plan. So that's key. Identify your business value chain. So no business is made up of just one building, one office, and so on. It's made up of all the intrinsic links that make up that business. So it might be suppliers, it might be regional offices, it might be all of these different elements that are put together. And now these elements have changed since COVID. There's different links, different suppliers, different people coming in from different areas. Make sure you identify all of those things, because essentially at the end of the day, you're going to need to measure the risk element of each of those and then look at it from an aggregated perspective. So your head office may be nice and secure because there's nobody in it anymore, but actually now you have 50 or 100 remote offices, or even more when you look at people's homes, and look at all of those and think, well, are our policies effective for those areas? Do we have the right controls in place? All those kind of things. And you can only do that if you only protect if you know what you're going to protect. So you have to identify this down. You have to write this out. What is the business value chain of our business? Calculate your inherent cyber risk. And this is drawn on from the FFIC, from the European Central Bank, from the G7 group of 7 countries. This is continually saying a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Understand what's important to your business from a cyber perspective. And that's really, really key. So we need to look at that from the perspective of analyzing then the maturity of controls in place and make sure that you are covering off that inherent risk. So factor in as many elements as you can and get the most accurate metric you can to work out where you are on an inherent risk perspective. and identify your existing mitigating controls. So don't forget, your inherent risk is looking at your risk without controls. Then you have your current controls in place, and the balance of risk is what we refer to as residual risk. And you want to build that in to your meaningful metrics when you're going back to the business. So you want to be able to say to guys, we've looked at our inherent risk, we've looked at what controls we have in place, and here's a balance of risk, and link that all the way back to the business objectives of what's going on in the business at the moment. Look, if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it. And this is all about knowing what to protect, how to protect it, and where the risk is. And collaborate. This can't be a tail wagging the dog. This has to be all of the business working together, that multidisciplinary approach, and go extended beyond your business, right through your business value chain. Go into sector by sector, go into to even country, regions, everything else like that. Share intelligence, collaborate, work on what's the best approach for these things. And intelligence comes in many forms, guys. It's not just about what the activity of bad actors. It's also about, hey, what's the best video software to use for video conferencing? What's the easiest one, the most secure one to use? Hey, what's the best identity and access management system to use? That's intelligence. Information, actionable information is intelligence. So collaborate, save yourself time, start working together on that common goal. Remember that cod coming down to hit the earth? We're all on this together, and we're all in this fight together to deal with the cyber risk and the knock-on contagion effect that this has across the entire global digital economy. Finally, update your strategy and be brave. So getting back to those wheels on the car, your strategy you had beforehand, your cyber strategy, may not now. In fact, as I say, I will take a bet it doesn't line up with your business strategy of today and your operational plans and strategy of today. So change it, update it, be brave, move forward with the business, and deal with things as they come along, because this will feel like we're at war for a period of time as we adjust. But as we adjust, we need to document where we are and make sure and test and so on. And that's the best way of dealing with these related issues. But remember this, the digitalization is going to continue to accelerate, because everybody's going to find faster, better, more efficient ways of doing things. There's that psychological impact as well, that people have just, moved from that transactional point of view of trust online into that piece where they're just saying, well, that's their first protocol. Now, how do I do this? Have I got an app for that? Is there a website for that? And not getting into that interconnection with the human element of it. So this is, ironically, a brilliant time to be an entrepreneur or innovating in the world of technology, because so many people are looking now to do things in a different way, in a more efficient way online, and leveraging the technology. So final on this would be to identify the opportunities. So as you transform your business, as you look at all of these things within your own environment and your own organizations, what you want to be able to look at is, well, where there's opportunities there with all of these changes, can we make the business more efficient? Can we cost savings? Can we reduce risk? Can we escalate and fast track some of our digital transformational plans? All of those kinds of things. My final slide would be related back to what John F. Kennedy said: in the Chinese language, the word crisis is composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity. So in this crisis, this COVID crisis, yes, there's lots of danger, but there's lots of opportunity for those that have the minds open to it, and those who are not afraid to adapt and to move forward. So at that point, I'll thank you for your attention, and I will hand over for any questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been great. It was very enlightening. There are a few questions for you. I just want to remember the attendees, if they have any other questions, they can still ask them on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So I have a comment from Monica. She's saying that it was a great presentation and that she would like to hear your opinion on the role of disinformation and cyber propaganda in the COVID-19 storm.
Sorry, I missed that, Arnaud. Just the last part of that question, please. So
she would like to hear the role of disinformation and cyber propaganda in the COVID-19 storm.
So the role of disinformation in regards to what element exactly? I might not be just understanding the question.
The coronavirus storm.
The coronavirus storm. Well, really what we're trying to get across there is that, look, the impact of coronavirus on society and has had these many facets. of this. The key element of what I've been talking about here for the last while has been about cyber resilience, which is a core part of cybersecurity and cyber risk management, but it's never been a more important part of what people need to do. And I think we acknowledge that we've an increased dependence on the internet, on the digital economy, all of those elements, and all of these things are changing at the same time. So that if we can holistically look at that from the perspective of dealing with it even in our own internet garden, if you like, it has a knock-on effect to the fact because we're so interconnected and interdependent.
Okay. Cyril is asking, how can you go beyond compliance in cyber resilience when we are equally constrained on resources and funds after the coronavirus?
It's a great question. So the magic point here and the catalyst in this is that it's linking it back to the business. So the business sees compliance as, and I'll speak for you here, almost a headache. You know, it's a cost on the bottom line. You have to be compliant, blah, blah, blah. And it's a minimum baseline. But when you articulate back to the business and say, look, we need to go beyond the minimum because over here we have this business objective and we're not going to meet that business objective. And that business objective isn't compliance. That business objective is rolling out a new app or surviving because we're bringing in a new website or a new way to deal with our customers or clients. Once you relate back to the business objectives, so you sort of need to pair it right back and say, what's the vision of the business? And therefore they have a strategy, they have goals, they have tactics, they have key objectives they want to deliver. When you're able to articulate that back to the business and say, hey guys, you don't have you're carrying this amount of residual risk around being able to deliver out that mobile app or whatever it happens to be for the business will listen and will give you the resources. I promise you they will, because what you're talking about is the survival of the business. Where this disconnect comes from in relation to certainly compliance always about, well, what can we get away with? You know, what can we do just to get the tick in the box and to get where we are? That mindset has to go. The mindset has to be, how can we protect our business and make it strong enough so we can thrive and survive? And what that means is understanding what the business is about. The amount, unfortunately, of businesses that I've walked into over the years, and you said to them, okay, so you're working in this bank, whatever, and what does the bank do? What's the cyber strategy? Or what's the business strategy of this bank? Oh, I don't know. They give out mortgages, they give out loans. So what's the business strategy? What's the 5-year plan for this bank? So it doesn't matter whether it's a bank or what it is. If you're not lining up your approach to cybersecurity and risk to what the business is and the business leaders are, well, then all you are is someone that's trying to keep the compliance regulators at bay. Therefore, you're not going to get much attention. You're not going to get as much budget as you want. But if you become a business enabler, a rainmaker, somebody that can make that business deliver on their objectives and their goals and their vision, then you are now somebody who is a catalyst in the business, and you're just seen overnight completely differently because you can make things happen as opposed to stop the bad from happening, if you know what I mean. So I think it is a catalyst, and that's where that opportunity comes from as well for businesses and individuals within businesses as well, from their own career perspective, is to say, actually, yeah, I'm not about keeping the wolf at the door. I'm about actually enabling this business. How do I enable this business? How do I make it actually sing? How do I make it thrive? When everyone else is just worried about doing as little as they can for as little as they can. You know, that investment will pay back. Business people will make informed decisions and will make decisions if you give them the right facts. But if you're going into them and you're saying, you know, we're trying to do PCI compliance, we've done a scan on the network and I have 25,000 level 4 vulnerabilities, yawn. Like, the business isn't interested. What's the fine for PCI? They go, yeah, we'll absorb the fine. Let's just move on. You know, and especially now, because this is about almost a certain amount of entrepreneurial aggression that's required in businesses. People need to survive. Because back to that Darwin slide, we're going to need to adapt or die. Those people need to be able to do that.
Yeah, great. So we have another question from Martin. He's saying, some have argued that there are certain areas where we can simply not achieve security if we digitalize the content. What's your take on that?
Well, security itself, I often talk about it being a paradox, because secure means free from risk. But how can we work in a digital architecture, digital economy, and be free from risk? We can't. So this is about risk management. So effectively, the technique to deal with this is about establishing a risk register where the business has to have an owner of that risk and has to sign off that they are going to accept that risk, or they're going to mitigate it, or they're going to transfer it. You know, there's only some key things they could do around this. So if you can't secure something, it's not that you technically can't secure it. You're saying you can't secure it because maybe you don't have the resources or you don't have the budget or whatever. But turn that back on the business and say, here's what I've identified. I've identified these sets of don't forget, a threat is a perceived risk. So you need to articulate that it is a risk to the business, and then be able to say, okay, based on that, are you accepting, to the CEO or whoever you're dealing with, are you accepting that risk because it's in the risk register? It changes the conversation, it changes the narrative, because nobody at a governance level and an oversight level is going to sign off on something unless they're agreeing that, yes, we can't afford to deal with that, or what we call as a risk leverage score. Is the cost of the control not worth it to deal with the risk? So cybersecurity people need to get their head out of this purist binary space. I made it secure, therefore that's it, end of story. That's not what this is about. This is about being able to manage the risk to the security of whatever that asset is. So, and by the security, I mean the confidentiality, the integrity and availability of that, and then be able to articulate that back to the business and let the business make the decision of whether it needs to be more secure or less secure, as the case may be. So this is a lot of this comes to life when you start getting metrics around these things. And again, I'm not talking about the industry metrics. I'm talking about metrics that people could, don't forget, look, risk is likelihood by impact, right? So what's the likelihood you're going to get DDoSed? What's the impact if you get DDoSed, right? So nice, simple risk matrix. Go to the business and say, I need a control because it's now coming in as a high, or it's now coming in as low, whatever. And all of those, it's simple risk management techniques, bring the subject to life, and it takes it away from the subjectivity. One of my pet hates is the fact that people talk about cybersecurity, that it's an art form. It's a science, and it should be a science. And metrics is the art of measuring, right? So we should be measuring cyber risk. And forget about this word security. It's measuring cyber risk so that you can articulate back to the business, they can make risk-based decisions. Businesses are doing risk from day one. I mean, you know, the word entrepreneur itself means risk taker. You know, this is what business people do. They take risks, they manage risks, they make risk-based decisions all day long. So your job, if you're dealing with cybersecurity, risk, compliance, all of those areas around that, is to articulate that back to the business so they can make an informed decision.
Great. So yesterday we had a workshop on cyber insurance. And some of the surveys that were conducted, they suggested that most of the companies, they are not really aware of the threats that they can suffer. Do you think it's lack of awareness, or maybe the government should intervene, maybe scare them a bit?
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing where some businesses will put their head in the sand. I think boards have become much better and much more informed about the kinds of things that can happen to their businesses. And certainly innovative companies and so on are very well aware of the impacts of cyber threats globally. We only have to pick up the newspaper every single day and to see it. So look, whether you're an airline who gets $250 million GDPR fine and lose $250 million on your share price in the same 24 hours, that's £500 million. Nobody can afford that. So everybody understands the impact of not doing cybersecurity risk management very well. So from an insurance perspective, I think the challenge is really for the insurance industry itself is to be clearer about what is being covered generally within policies, because there's so much gray area around what insurance actually covers. And well, if that was an APT threat, was that an act of war? Is that covered? Well, how long was the vulnerability there? Was it already there on the system before you took out your insurance policy, but it only got, you know, invoked? So there's a lot of questions and a lot of teasing out to be done. So the businesses avail of the insurance is a great way of managing risk, a great way to transfer. It's a great risk treatment option if you get the right policy for the right kind of risk. But don't let it become this false sense of security that I'm covered now. I don't really need to do anything because I have an insurance policy. That's my biggest fear around cyber insurance. And I think some of the glossy products that are being sold and touted around are quite good. But I don't think the issue is that leadership don't know that there's risks. I think most are informed. People would have to have their head in the sand, or I don't know where they're living, if they don't know that there's cyber threats and they have a real impact.
Great. So we have a last question. Cyril is asking, what is the most singular task that any security analyst should focus on?
Education. Education is key. It is the most valuable cybersecurity control anybody can get, is to educate their people at the right level. So you need to think of your business almost like a pyramid, and at the bottom level, where let's say, for example, you're a software development company, the bottom level, not everybody would have access to the code. So you give them a general level of education. Don't click on phishing emails, blah, 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 all that good stuff, right? As you move up the stack, you're going to want more pointed, more direct, more specific education right up to the leadership piece. So education, if it's the right kind of education, not that compliance stuff of tick, tick, tick and all that good stuff. I wouldn't click on a link and all that. That is only general stuff down at a base level. You need specific for the business that the business can buy into and that they understand it from a business perspective. So specific cyber education targeted at the right audience is hugely effective and probably most bang for buck, I would say, in relation to control, because when all the technology pieces fail, it's the human that gets hacked and they're your last line of defense. If there's 500 people working in your company, that's 500 people that can protect your company, you know, as opposed to one security manager. So education all the time, all the way.
Okay, so we have a last minute question from Alex, who is saying that you mentioned risk a few times, but risk-based decisions are normally made on high-level risks, whereas cybersecurity assessments are based on low-level risks. So how do you aggregate low-level risks to produce high-level ones?
Well, the point he's making there would really depend on what the risk policy of that organization is, what the levels are to make different decisions, and what's a low level risk and what's a high level risk. But all businesses make risk-based decisions all day long, whether they're going to patch something, not patch something, all of those kind of things. But the risks I'm referring to is from a leadership perspective that are brought to the leadership's attention to say, if we don't do this, it will impact our operational model or our vision or ambitions for this company. The day-to-day low-level stuff, this can't be paralysis by analysis. This can't be over-flooding of risk assessments every time we need to do something. We still need the freedom to be able to work and operate when we manage risk and security within a business. But those parameters, those thresholds need to be established, and that's done within policy. So don't forget, it's policies, procedures, then work lists and instructions and so on. But the policies, which are effectively the laws of how the company works themselves, they're the internal laws, effectively what a policy is. So if the policy says, look, if it's a risk up to that level, you handle that within IT or whatever it happens to be, but risks that would affect the overall business performance or the overall bottom line of the business, if it has a financial risk, then that goes over to somebody who knows how to measure the risk and manage it and get the key decisions. So it's not about having this blanket thing right across the whole business and we're all doing risk assessments all day long. It's about making sure that the communication piece is going up there, aggregated risks, and that somebody, getting back to that piece I made about cyber resilience and so on, about there needs to be somebody accountable, and they cannot. I'll finalize it with this point. You want to make sure that you bridge the gap, that the disconnect between business leaders and what's going on operationally within the business from a cyber perspective. We call it cybersecurity, call it cyber risk, but it's that communication piece. Make sure that there's no plausible deniability at the top end that they didn't know something was going on or they didn't know something. So they can say that if you're just going in with vulnerability scans and reports and things like that. But if you're going in and clearly saying that you've identified risks that impact what the business mission is, then that's an automatic governance event. So that's that corporate law. They have to do something about it. They have to either say, well, we accept it or we're going to do something about it. So I think that would be the best thing, but this isn't about becoming you know, overly bureaucratic within organizations, but this is about making sure that you're measuring that the risk as you move forward and transition into a completely new kind of business operation.
Great. Okay, with that, I think that we will need to close the session. Thank you very much, Paul, for accepting our invitation and being with us today. It's been really great, and we hope you can join for the next editions of the conference. And thank you as well to all the participants and the other panelists of the day. And thank you very much.
Thank you.